Imagine showing up to your brother's engagement dinner, ready to celebrate, and then being told, "Sorry, this table's for family only." He pointed to a chair by the trash bin and made me sit there. What happened next will blow your mind. Hi, I'm Eli, and I've always been the responsible one in my family. But last fall, I finally stopped playing the role of the background character. This is the story of how I was excluded, humiliated, and how I turned that moment into the most satisfying revenge of my life. Stick around for the full story and make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the bell. This is a journey you won't want to miss. My name is Eli, and I guess you could say I've always been the responsible sibling. Not the favorite, not the rebel, not the golden child, just the one who showed up on time, paid my bills, and remembered everyone's birthday. I work in finance, live alone, and don't really make a fuss about much. In my family, though, I was always sort of the background character, the kind of guy who gets invited to weddings but never asked to be in the photos. I'd show up for holidays and gatherings, but I was rarely seen, never truly embraced. It wasn't that I wasn't loved, at least. I thought I was. But there was always this feeling that I was more like the emergency contact than a real member of the family. I was involved, but I was never included. I wasn't the one my parents turned to for advice, or the one they celebrated when things went well. I was just there. Growing up, my brother Mason was the star. He was charismatic, reckless, and always got himself into some kind of trouble. But somehow, he always landed on his feet. Even when he dropped out of college, blew through 2 jobs, and moved back home at 28, my parents defended him like he was some kind of genius. Mason had this smug charm that my parents ate up like candy. I was the responsible one, the one who followed the rules, paid my way through school, kept a steady job, and even helped cover the mortgage when Dad's hours got cut. But none of that ever seemed to matter to them, at least not enough to earn me a seat at the head of the table. I'll admit, there were times when I felt a little bitter about it, but I never let it show. I kept my head down, did what was expected, and quietly built my own life. Maybe one day, I thought, if I kept showing up, I'd finally be seen as a part of the family, not just the guy funding it from the background, but that illusion, the one that kept me holding on, shattered one night. It was a night that started out like any other, but ended up changing everything for me. The dinner invitation. It started with Mason's engagement dinner. He'd just proposed to Brooke, a woman my mom had already dubbed an absolute angel, and my parents decided to throw a big celebratory dinner at a swanky rooftop restaurant downtown, a place that was a bit out of their usual budget, but they were celebrating Mason, so they went all out. A few weeks before the event, I got a call from my mom, that syrupy sweet tone she uses when she wants something. "Eli, sweetheart, we'd love it if you could make it to Mason and Brooke's engagement dinner. It's going to be such a special night," she said, the warmth in her voice almost convincing. "Of course, I'll be there," I said, not even hesitating. But then she added, as if it were an afterthought, "And if it's not too much trouble, we were hoping you could help with the reservation. Just to hold it. We'll pay you back, of course." I should have known right then that "we'll pay you back" meant I'd never see that money again. But like always, I agreed. It was Mason's night. After all, I figured I'd take the opportunity to finally feel like I was truly a part of it. Maybe, just maybe, this time, I'd get a seat at the table. I called the restaurant, booked a private space for 20 people, and gave them my card for the deposit. I didn't mind, not really. It was Mason's night, and I wanted it to be perfect for him. So, I thought, if it meant helping with the reservation, that was a small price to pay. I'd show up, be the dutiful son, and maybe, just maybe, my family would see me for once. The night of the dinner, I showed up on time. 7:00 sharp. I was dressed in my dark navy suit, a freshly pressed shirt, new cufflinks I'd been saving up for, and I even brought a nice bottle of champagne for the couple. I printed out a custom card with their initials, something personal, something thoughtful. I was ready to be a part of it. When I arrived at the rooftop, I was greeted by a hostess who gave me a small nod. She gestured toward the private section. I took a deep breath, trying to manage the nervous excitement that came with the hope of finally being acknowledged. I walked in, expecting to be met with at least a smile of recognition, but instead, Mason turned to me, gave me a brief, disinterested glance, and smirked. "Oh hey, glad you made it." That was it. Just a casual greeting. I looked at him, expecting more, but it wasn't coming. Then, without even acknowledging the champagne bottle in my hand, he pointed toward a fold-out chair off to the side, next to a trash bin, and said, "Sorry, this table's for family only." The humiliation. I blinked, thinking maybe I misheard him. I scanned the room, looking for some sign that this was a joke, but there was none. My mom was sitting nearby, giving me that tight-lipped smile she always used when she didn't want to get involved. Dad gave his awkward chuckle and raised his glass, not even looking in my direction. Brooke didn't even glance up from the conversation she was having with her parents. I stood there for a moment, stunned. Part of me thought Mason might call me over to the real table, but he didn't. Instead, he just casually told me that I could sit next to the trash can. He didn't even seem to care. I wanted to say something, but my throat closed up. My ears were hot, and I felt the familiar sting of being excluded, like I had when I was a kid, left out of family photos, ignored in family events, always the one standing on the sidelines. But I didn't say anything. I didn't want to make a scene, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. I walked over to the folding chair, set my champagne bottle on the floor next to me, and sat down, alone. I didn't even bother to take off my coat. I just sat there, frozen. I watched as the waiter came by and asked if I was with the party. I nodded silently, and he handed me a glass of water. He didn't ask any more questions, and I didn't offer any explanations. I just sat there as the laughter, the toasts, the clinking of glasses continued around me. The night I had hoped would finally make me feel part of the family was quickly becoming the night I realized just how invisible I was. For almost 2 hours, I sat there, watching them enjoy the evening, while I was nothing more than an afterthought. My brother gave a long speech about how lucky he was to be surrounded by his closest people, while I sat by myself, the one who had paid for it all. My mom teared up when Brooke called her the best future mother-in-law a girl could ask for. Meanwhile, I was ignored. Not once did anyone ask if I wanted to order food, or if I was even okay. Cliffhanger 12 Uzras 13. Then, the check came. It was $3,218. I watched as the waiter walked toward their table with the leather folder, and then, he paused. He looked at the folder, and then looked around. Confused. "Excuse me, sir," he said, his voice soft, but loud enough for everyone to hear. "The total for the event is $3,208. Should I run the same card for the final amount?" I smiled, a calm, slow smile, and spoke clearly, so everyone could hear. "Not my table," I said. "I was told this table was for family only." The room went quiet. It wasn't a normal kind of silence. It wasn't the gentle hum of conversation between courses or the quiet lull after a toast. This was thick, heavy. You could almost feel the collective breath of the entire table being sucked in, like they were all holding their breath, waiting for someone to say something. For a second, nobody moved. The waiter stood awkwardly, holding the leather folder like it was some kind of toxic object. I could see Mason's face starting to twitch, his eyes darting between me and the waiter. My mom's expression flickered from confusion to concern. Dad sat straighter, his face flushing red as he tried to figure out how to make this all go away. And Brooke? She hadn't even looked up from her conversation with her parents until now, but when she did, the confusion on her face was obvious. For the first time all night, she looked like someone who wasn't sure what was going on. It wasn't until I opened my mouth again that I realized something. This wasn't just about me anymore. I looked at Mason and said, "I was told this was for family only." I assumed that meant I wasn't included. The words came out in a calm, measured tone, but the weight behind them hit harder than anything I could have screamed. Mason's smug grin faltered. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but no words came out. The awkwardness in the air grew thicker by the second, as if everyone around the table could finally see the truth that had been staring me in the face for years. I was never really part of the family, not in the way they wanted to pretend. I gave one last look at the table. I watched my brother, the center of attention, his face shifting from confusion to irritation, but he didn't apologize. He didn't even seem embarrassed. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. All these years of being the responsible one, the one who quietly picked up the pieces for everyone else, this was the thanks I got. Mason leaned back in his chair and scoffed. "Come on, man, it's just a joke. Don't take it so seriously." His voice had the same mocking edge that it always did when he wanted to avoid responsibility. But I wasn't having it anymore. I was tired of him treating me like the punchline to a joke that was never funny. "Yeah, that's the problem," I said slowly, making sure my voice cut through the tension. "You think everything's a joke, as long as it's at someone else's expense." A few awkward chuckles rippled around the table, but they didn't seem to make anyone feel better. Brooke's dad, who had hardly said a word all evening, finally spoke up. "You invited him to this engagement dinner, and you put him in a chair next to a trash can." His voice was firm, sharp, like someone who had just woken up to reality. Mason's face went pale. For a moment, he looked like a deer caught in headlights, but then he looked at our mom, seeking validation, and she gave him a weak, tight-lipped smile. "Let's not blow this out of proportion. Eli," she said, her voice thin, "you're always so dramatic. You've always been this way." It was the same line she used every time Mason screwed up. "Eli's just sensitive. He's always tired. He's overreacting." Anything to avoid confronting the reality of Mason's behavior, anything to keep him in the spotlight, even when he didn't deserve to be there. I stood up, feeling the weight of everything that had built up inside me finally crashing down. My hands were trembling, not from fear, but from a long-suppressed rage I had buried for years. Years of being the silent supporter, the one who was always there, but never noticed. Without saying another word, I picked up my coat, grabbed the champagne bottle from the floor, and walked toward the elevator. But just as I reached the elevator, I heard my father's voice, a little louder than I had expected. "Eli, come on," he said, his tone shifting from passive to more urgent. "You've already paid for half. You might as well finish it. You know, make things right." That single sentence hit me like a ton of bricks. The frustration that had been bubbling up finally exploded. I turned around slowly, walked back toward the table, and stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing. I looked at my dad. "You're right," I said, my voice low and steady. "I did pay for the deposit. I called 3 different restaurants to find the one with the best view of the city. I ordered custom floral arrangements because Mom said fake flowers would look cheap in the photos. I paid the $500 non-refundable deposit without blinking. I showed up on time, alone, in a suit, to support my brother. And what did I get in return?" I paused, letting the words sink in. I looked at the empty chair next to the trash, the place where I had spent the last 2 hours feeling invisible. A folding chair next to a garbage bin, and a "sorry, family only." Mason's face turned beet red. His smirk was completely gone now, replaced by anger and embarrassment. He stood up, trying to puff himself up, but it only made him look more ridiculous. "You're making a scene," he spat. "No," I said, my voice cutting through the tension like a knife. "I'm drawing a line." I turned on my heel and walked toward the stairs. Every step I took felt like it echoed through the room, the pounding of my heartbeat reverberating in my ears. I didn't take the elevator. I didn't need the elevator. I needed to get out of there, away from them, away from the family who had never really seen me. I didn't know where I was going, but I didn't care. I thought leaving the dinner would be the end of it. A bold exit, a final statement, maybe a few uncomfortable apologies, and some forced attempts to move on, pretending nothing had happened. But as I walked out into the cool night air, still in my suit, still holding that unopened bottle of champagne, I had no idea how deep the ripple effects of that night would go. I didn't know where I was going, but I kept walking, my mind racing. I had done it. I had finally stood up for myself after years of being ignored, after years of being treated like an afterthought, like I wasn't really part of my own family. As I walked, I tried to imagine how Mason would react, how my parents would explain away his behavior. I had a feeling they'd try to brush it under the rug, to make excuses for him, as they always did. But I didn't care anymore. For the first time in my life, I was free of the burden of their favoritism. I didn't need their validation, and I certainly didn't need Mason's approval. I made my way home, not sure what I was expecting. I figured there might be a few awkward texts the next day, a half-hearted apology from Mason, or maybe a quick attempt from my mom to smooth things over. But as I stepped into my apartment, kicked off my shoes, and finally took off my suit jacket, I realized I hadn't even processed how humiliated I'd been until just that moment. I was shaking, not with anger, but with disbelief. It wasn't just the physical act of being excluded from the dinner. It was everything that led up to it, the years of being the responsible one, the one who never asked for anything, and yet somehow was still always pushed to the side. That moment in the restaurant, that chair by the trash bin, wasn't just a symbolic insult. It was the culmination of everything I had been silently enduring for so long. The texts that followed. The first text came around midnight. It was from Mason. Dude, seriously, you couldn't have just paid the check and talked to me later. What's your deal? I stared at it for a moment. He still didn't get it. He still thought I was just throwing a tantrum, a joke. He couldn't see that it wasn't about the bill. It wasn't about the chair. It was about being treated like I didn't matter. Again, I didn't respond. I wasn't going to get into it with him. I had said everything I needed to say in that moment, and no amount of arguing was going to make him understand. I put my phone down and sat in the quiet of my apartment, the sound of my own breathing the only thing breaking the silence. Then, a second text came through. This time, it was from my mom. You embarrassed us in front of Brooke's entire family. Was that your goal? Revenge? I felt a bitter laugh rise in my throat. Revenge. Was she seriously asking me if I wanted revenge for standing up for myself? This wasn't revenge. It was finally finding my voice. It was making sure they knew I wasn't just the family ATM or the unpaid chauffeur anymore. I didn't reply to her text either. The phone call from Brooke. The phone rang a few minutes later. An unknown number. I hesitated for a moment, wondering if it was Mason calling again, but then I answered. It was Brooke. Hi, Eli, she said, her voice quieter than I had ever heard it. I know we don't really talk, but can I ask you something? I felt a slight pang of curiosity, but I kept my tone neutral. Sure, what's up? Did you really pay for everything, the deposit, the flowers, all of it? There was a long pause on the other end. I didn't know what to say at first. Part of me felt a little surprised that Brooke was calling me at all, given how she had been swept up in everything. But the other part of me knew exactly what was going on. Her father had found out. I took a breath and answered simply, yeah, I did. There was a long silence after that. I could hear Brooke's breath on the other end of the line as she processed my words. Then, she spoke again, quieter this time. They told my dad you offered to pay for everything, that it was your idea. I froze. I never offered. I said slowly, trying to keep my voice steady. They asked, and I said yes. I didn't expect anything in return. I did it because I thought that's what you do for family, but I definitely didn't do it for show. Brooke sighed and her voice softened. Well, my dad's furious. He thought you volunteered as a kind gesture, but now he's saying he wouldn't have agreed to the restaurant if he knew you were being treated like that. He feels like they made him look like a fool. I didn't know what to say to that. It wasn't just that Mason and my parents had lied to her family about the costs, it was the fact that they had treated me like dirt in the process. The fact that they'd made me feel like I wasn't even part of the family while using me to fund the celebration. I'm not calling to get involved, Brooke added quickly. I just thought you should know. I took a deep breath and thanked her, ending the call with a feeling of strange closure. But that wasn't the end of it. It wasn't even close. The ripple effect. Over the next few days, everything escalated faster than I could have imagined. I thought the dinner would be a one-off event, a family blow-up that might cause some awkwardness, but nothing major. Instead, things started to fall apart, and it wasn't just Mason who was affected. It was all of them. The family group chat, which had been silent since the night of the dinner, suddenly came to life. The first message was from my mom. Eli, we need to talk. Call me when you have a minute. I didn't respond. Then, Mason jumped in. You seriously messed things up with Brooke's family. You owe us a fix. What's your problem? I ignored him, too. A few hours later, another message from my dad. This is getting out of hand. Just apologize and let's move on. I didn't respond to any of them. It wasn't about the chair or the bill. It wasn't about the embarrassment at the restaurant. This was about years of being taken for granted, years of being the backup in my own family, years of giving and never receiving anything in return. They could apologize all they wanted, but it wouldn't change the years of neglect I had quietly endured. Then, I heard through the grapevine that Brooke's father had a meltdown the day after the dinner. He had apparently been furious when he realized how Mason had treated me. His words stung, but they made me realize something. I wasn't the problem. Mason was the one who had humiliated himself. And now, it was all falling apart. The consequences begin. The next few days felt like a blur. I was busy with work, but it was impossible to ignore the growing tension in the family. I received a call from Aunt Karen, my mom's sister, someone who had never been especially warm or loving toward me. I heard about the dinner, she said, cutting straight to the point, and I just wanted to say, good for you. I was taken aback. Excuse me, I asked, genuinely confused. It's about time someone shook the tree. Aunt Karen said, your parents have been brushing everything under the rug for so long, and Mason's gotten away with treating you like a side character for years. Maybe now they'll realize you're not just their ATM. Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. Finally, someone in my family saw me. Not as the wallet, not as the scapegoat, but as a person. When I left that restaurant, I thought it would be the end of it. A bold exit, a statement, a final stand, a few awkward apologies the next day, maybe a half-hearted attempt to smooth things over, and that would be it. I didn't realize how deep the ripple effect would go. I didn't know that this one moment would crack the foundation of everything I had ever known about my family, exposing the raw truth of how I'd been treated. I walked away from the restaurant that night, the bottle of champagne still unopened, the cool night air hitting my face like a slap. I wasn't sure where I was going or what I was doing, but I knew that for the first time, I was free. Free from the years of quietly taking care of everyone else. Free from pretending that things were fine when they weren't. I wasn't just leaving the restaurant, I was leaving behind the version of me that had been invisible. The one who never mattered enough to sit at the table. My thoughts raced as I walked aimlessly through the city streets. It wasn't the embarrassment of sitting next to the trash can that burned in my chest. It was everything that had led up to that moment. The years of being the responsible one, the reliable one, the one who showed up when no one else would, and still, they treated me like I didn't belong. Family only. That phrase was a punch to the gut that I wasn't prepared for. But what hit hardest was the realization that no matter how much I did for them, I would always be nothing more than the guy who picked up the slack. As I wandered through the city, my phone lit up with messages. At first, I ignored them. I didn't want to hear it. But when I got home, I knew I couldn't escape the inevitable. The fallout had begun. The first text. Mason's reaction. The first text came from Mason. Dude, seriously, you couldn't just pay the check and talk to me later. What's your problem? I stared at the message for a moment, incredulous. Really? This was his response. It wasn't even about the money, and yet he still saw me as the backup his personal wallet. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream, but I knew I wasn't going to get into it with him. He wouldn't get it. He never did. He was still trying to frame it as if I were the one with the problem. I didn't respond. Then, the second text came in, this time from my mom. You embarrassed us in front of Brooke's entire family. Was that your goal? Revenge? I almost laughed out loud. Revenge. What had I done but stand up for myself? For the first time in years, I had finally said, enough. But of course, she didn't see it that way. To her, I was the one who had crossed the line. I wasn't playing the role of the dutiful son anymore. I was stepping out of line, and she didn't know how to handle it. Again, I didn't reply. I wasn't going to be guilt-tripped into an apology. Not this time. I had drawn my line in the sand. Brooke's call, just as I was settling into the quiet of my apartment, trying to process everything that had happened, my phone rang. An unknown number. I hesitated for a second before answering. It was Brooke. Hi, Eli, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it. I know we don't really talk, but can I ask you something? I wasn't sure what to expect, but something about the way she spoke made me pause. Sure, what's up? Did you really pay for everything? The deposit, the flowers, all of it? I could hear the hesitation in her voice. It wasn't just a question, it was a realization. I could feel the shift in her tone, like she was starting to understand something that had been hidden under the surface for so long. Yeah, I answered simply, I did. Another long silence passed. Then she spoke again, quieter this time, almost as if she didn't want to say it out loud. They told my dad you offered to pay for everything, that it was your idea. I felt a pang of frustration. I never offered. I said, keeping my voice steady. They asked, and I said yes. I didn't expect anything in return. I did it because I thought that's what you do for family, but I definitely didn't do it for show. Brooke sighed deeply. Well, my dad's furious. He thought you volunteered as a kind gesture, But now he's saying he wouldn't have agreed to the restaurant if he knew you were being treated like that. I felt a small sense of vindication. Maybe now, Brooke's dad, who seemed to have been the only one who could see through Mason's charming, careless exterior, was starting to realize just how wrong everything had been. "I'm not calling to get involved," she added quickly, as if she realized the weight of her words. "I just thought you should know." I thanked her for telling me, but the truth was, it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The consequences begin. The fallout started to unfold more quickly than I could have imagined. I had no idea how badly things would spiral from that one moment, but it didn't take long before the entire family was affected. The family group chat exploded with messages. I could feel the tension in each word. The first message came from my mom. "Eli, we need to talk. Call me when you have a minute." I didn't respond. Then Mason sent a message. "You seriously messed things up with Brooke's family. You owe us a fix. What's your problem?" I didn't reply to that either. Next came my dad, in his usual fashion, trying to smooth things over. "This is getting out of hand. Just apologize and let's move on." I ignored that too. Each message felt like a reminder that they still didn't get it. This wasn't about the dinner, the money, or the chair. This was about years of being sidelined, years of being treated as an afterthought. And now that I finally stood up for myself, they didn't know what to do. They were so used to me being the one who just quietly accepted everything. But this time, I had drawn a line in the sand. And that line, apparently, was too much for them to handle. But things were about to get worse, and not in the way I expected. Brooke's father and the real consequence. I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Brooke's dad had a meltdown the day after the dinner. He had apparently been furious when he realized how Mason had treated me, and how Mason and my family had deceived them. He was a businessman, not someone who tolerated manipulation or lies, and he wasn't going to let this slide. From what I gathered, he said something like, "If this is how they treat their own blood, what happens when you marry into it?" And just like that, Mason's world started to crumble. Brooke had been so busy with wedding planning, she hadn't even realized the full extent of Mason's behavior. But once her dad got involved, the cracks started to show. Suddenly, wedding planning was on hold. Brooke packed up, went to her condo for a mental reset, and the Pinterest boards disappeared. The wedding was off before it had even truly begun. The email from my mom. A few days later, my mom sent me an email. The subject line read simply, "Please." It was 5 paragraphs of sugar-coated manipulation. She apologized, sort of. She said she never meant to hurt me, never realized how excluded I felt, and how much it would mean to the family if I would just sit down with Mason and smooth things over. She never said the words "I'm sorry," though. She never really took responsibility. It was just a long explanation of why I misunderstood everything. I read it and let it sit in my inbox for a few hours. The audacity of it all, the way they always minimized my feelings, the way they tried to cover up the truth and paint me as the unreasonable one. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of a response. Not this time. The phone call with Aunt Karen. The phone call that shocked me came next. It was from Aunt Karen, my mom's sister. She wasn't exactly warm or fuzzy. In fact, we hadn't spoken in over a year. She was a sharp, no-nonsense businesswoman who ran her own design firm and always had a tone of barely concealed judgment. But when she called, she surprised me. I heard about the dinner. She said, her voice straightforward. And I just want to say, "Good for you." I blinked, not sure if I heard her right. "Excuse me, it's about time someone shook the tree," she said, cutting straight to the point. "Your parents have been brushing everything under the rug for so long, and Mason's gotten away with treating you like a side character for years. Maybe now they'll realize you're not just their ATM." Her words hit me in a way I didn't expect. Finally, someone in my family saw me not as the wallet, not as the scapegoat, but as a person. I hadn't expected any support, but now, for the first time, I realized I wasn't completely invisible. It felt good, though not the way I expected. The email from Brooke sat in my inbox for a few hours before I gathered the courage to open it. The subject line, "I think we need to talk," sounded like the precursor to something important, something big. I couldn't tell if I was dreading it or anticipating it. Either way, curiosity got the best of me, and I clicked it open. It was longer than I expected. Brooke had always been a woman of few words, but now there were paragraphs, polite, formal. And yet there was something in the tone that suggested she was unraveling. As I scrolled through her message, I found myself gripping my phone a little tighter. Eli, I know we don't really talk much, but I wanted to reach out and clear the air. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I realize I owe you an apology. She wrote, I had no idea how badly you were treated that night, and I can see now how things were wrong. It wasn't just the seating or the way Mason treated you, but how my family and I didn't see you for who you really were until it was too late. I paused, rereading that first paragraph. It was a lot to digest, especially coming from Brooke, who had always seemed so caught up in the whirlwind of Mason's life. But this wasn't just an apology. This was a reflection on everything that had happened. She didn't just acknowledge what Mason had done. She seemed to see the bigger picture, the bigger consequences. I know this is all a mess, but I wanted to let you know that Mason's side of the story isn't the truth. She continued, he told me you insisted on paying everything, that you didn't want to sit at the main table because you were too shy, and that you left early because of a work emergency. But when I spoke to the restaurant and got the real story, everything fell apart. I spoke to the manager, and the truth came out. I'm sorry I didn't realize it sooner. I could hardly breathe as I read the rest of her email. I had always known that Mason had a tendency to lie, to twist stories to suit himself. But hearing that Brooke had finally figured it out, that she had finally seen the truth, felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. Then came the part that made my heart stop. After everything I learned, I ended my engagement with Mason last night. The words stared back at me. I read them again, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Brooke had ended her engagement with Mason. It was almost too surreal to process. I had never expected this outcome. Never in a million years would I have guessed that this dinner would lead to Brooke ending things with him. She continued, this wasn't just about the dinner. It was about everything. The lies, the way he treated you, the way he always brushed off my concerns, and the way he downplayed everything. The moment I saw how you were treated, it became clear to me that I had been excusing things for too long. You were the only one who stood up for yourself that night, and I see that now. You were the only one with any dignity. My hands shook as I finished reading. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a life-changing moment, a wake-up call that Mason's world of charm and manipulation was crumbling. For the first time, someone who had once been blind to all of Mason's faults finally saw him for who he truly was. I know this is awkward, and I'm sorry if I'm causing more problems for you, but I just wanted to be honest. She ended, I think you deserve to know that I see it now, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. I sat there for what felt like hours, rereading the email over and over again. The relief was overwhelming, but so were the questions. What had made Brooke finally see the truth? Was it really just that dinner, or had something else triggered this massive shift in her perspective? Either way, something fundamental had shifted. Brooke had done the one thing I never thought she would. She had walked away from Mason, and I couldn't help but feel a tiny spark of hope, the kind I hadn't felt in years, that maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something new for me, too. The quiet. After the storm, in the days that followed, things took a strange turn. The family group chat remained eerily silent. No new messages, no updates, nothing. I couldn't decide if that silence was a blessing or a curse. Was my family finally processing everything that had happened, or were they just too ashamed to speak to me? Mason called a couple of times, but I didn't pick up. Part of me wanted to answer, to hear what he would say, but another part of me knew it would be pointless. He still didn't get it. And after everything, I didn't owe him an explanation. I didn't owe anyone an explanation anymore. Then came a message from my mom. It was short, terse, and a little too polite. Eli, I think it's time we talk. I'm ready to apologize. I think we should meet. I stared at the message, unsure of how to respond. The last time we'd spoken, she had tried to guilt-trip me, trying to downplay Mason's behavior and make it my responsibility to fix everything. Now, after Brooke had ended her engagement, after the fallout from the dinner, she was ready to apologize. I took a deep breath, processing everything. Did I want to meet her? Did I want to let her back into my life, knowing she had never really seen me for who I was? But the reality was, I wasn't the same person I had been just a few weeks ago. The dinner, the exclusion, Mason's cruel joke, it had all pushed me to my breaking point. It had shown me how little my family valued me, and how much I had been willing to tolerate for far too long. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their apologies either. I sat there for a long time, considering my options. Then, after much thought, I decided I wouldn't answer her message right away. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. Mason's desperation. A few more days passed before I heard from Mason again. This time, his message was frantic, urgent. "Bro, what did you do?" he typed. "My card's bouncing. I have a date with Brooke tonight, and the bill's coming up. The account's not working. What did you do? I need that money." I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. His desperation was palpable. He had always seen me as nothing more than a resource, someone who could be counted on when things went wrong, someone to bail him out. But now, I had finally taken a stand. I didn't respond to his text. Not immediately. Instead, I thought back to what I had done a few days earlier, the small act of taking control, of stopping Mason from using me as his personal ATM. I had taken the last bit of money in that joint account we had, the one I had set up years ago when Mason was unemployed. I had moved the funds to a new account and closed it. Mason still didn't realize it. He was too wrapped up in his own self-importance, his own drama, to understand that his world was crumbling around him. But soon enough, he'd have to face the consequences of his actions. I wasn't going to be the one to clean up his mess anymore. Aunt Karen's support. Aunt Karen, who had never really been warm toward me, called me again a few days later. This time, her voice was calm, almost kind. "I heard about everything with Mason," she said, "and I just wanted to tell you something I should have said a long time ago. Good for you. I've been watching how they've treated you for years, and I've always known it wasn't right. Maybe now, they'll finally see what they've been doing." Her words were like a salve to a wound I didn't even know I had. For the first time in my life, someone in my family saw me not as a tool, not as someone to be used, but as a person who deserved respect. "You don't need them," Aunt Karen added. "They've leaned on you for so long, and now it's time for them to learn how to stand on their own. You're not their safety net anymore." Eli. I had never expected support from her, but hearing those words, for the first time in years, I felt seen. The end of the line. Weeks passed, and things seemed to settle into a new normal. Mason tried to contact me a few more times, but I ignored his calls and texts. I was done with him. Brooke's engagement was officially over, and Mason was back to working part-time at a startup he hated. My parents sent me polite, short texts, each one more respectful than the last. My mom invited me to Thanksgiving, but with a casual, "if you feel up to it." I hadn't decided if I would go yet. Maybe I would, maybe I wouldn't. But the key was, for the first time, I had a choice. I wasn't bound to the family dynamics that had always kept me small. And that was the real victory. Story 2. I always thought I'd have more time before this all exploded, before my family found a way to make everything my problem again. But the night my father broke into my apartment and tried to bully me into giving him back the money, I knew things had gone too far. I was sitting on my couch, scrolling through my phone, when I heard the door rattle. My heart skipped a beat before the door swung open. And there he was. My father, red-faced, eyes blazing with rage, his voice cracked through the apartment like a whip. "Either you give me the money, or I'll take it by force." I didn't flinch. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel scared. I just pulled my phone from my pocket, unlocked it, and dialed the police. As soon as the words "I'm calling the police" left my mouth, I saw it. His face went from fury to pale disbelief. He wasn't expecting this. He was expecting me to cave like I always did, the same way I always caved for my brother Ethan, who had been a constant, draining presence in my life for years. But not this time. This time, I was done. He took a step forward, his fists clenching. But I didn't budge. I didn't even look up. The phone was at my ear now, waiting for the operator. "You're out of your mind," he hissed. His voice lowered, but still laced with the same wildness. I didn't answer. I just let the silence hang in the air. His hands were shaking now, and I could tell the realization was sinking in. He was in his 60s, not in great shape, and he knew if he laid a hand on me, he'd be the one in trouble. The wheels turned in his head for a moment. I watched him shift from a man who thought he could bully his son into submission to someone who suddenly realized he might be in over his head. He turned on his heel, a low, guttural curse escaping his lips. "Forget it," he spat, backing away. "You're making a big mistake." I stood in the doorway, watching him go. The moment he was out the door, I closed it behind him. I knew this wasn't over. It all started with Ethan. I've been supporting him for years. The alcoholic, unemployed mess who never seemed to have enough. Every time he ran out of money, it was a new excuse: bills, rent, something for his wife Lisa, their son Jake. But I always gave in. I thought if I kept helping him, he would finally get it together. I'd be free. And then came the house. A ridiculous amount of money, $70,000 in cash. I thought if I helped them buy a home, it would end. They wouldn't need me anymore. I knew I wasn't getting the money back, but I saw it as a way to finally cut the cord. Except Ethan didn't tell anyone about the money, and if it hadn't been for his son Jake, I wouldn't have found out what they were really doing with it. Jake called me out of the blue a few weeks ago. It was strange. He never reached out like that. His voice was shaky, and I could tell something was wrong. "Uncle Oscar, you need to come get the money. They're not buying a house, they're going to the casino." At first, I thought he was exaggerating, but then Jake gave me the details. Lisa had laughed about wasting money on a house. "We can double it in one night," she'd said. Ethan had agreed. I was stunned, furious. The next day, I walked into their apartment. No warning, no call. I just showed up. I took every last cent. Ethan screamed, Lisa cried, but I didn't care. I was done. I didn't tell our parents about it. Ethan didn't. Too ashamed. That was 2 weeks ago. Now they were facing eviction. They had no place to go. And my parents, who'd always been critical of Ethan, had changed their tune. Suddenly, I was the bad guy. I was the one who had stolen from my brother, ruined his future. But I wasn't going to give in again. Not this time. The next morning, my phone exploded. Missed calls from my mom, a few from Ethan. Even Lisa had tried reaching out. I ignored them all. Then a text from Mom. "We need to talk. It's urgent." I sighed, knowing this was coming. I called her back. "Oscar," she started immediately, her voice frazzled. "What have you done?" "What are you talking about?" I asked, already rubbing my forehead in frustration. "Your father could have had a heart attack last night. He came home shaking, saying you called the police on him." I rolled my eyes. "He left before I even finished dialing." "That's not the point," she snapped, her voice sharp. "You humiliated him." "Oh, so that was the problem." My father didn't like being treated like a thug who broke into his own son's apartment. But then, she dropped the bombshell, "Ethan and Lisa are suing you." I froze. "For what?" "For stealing. They say you took $70,000 from them." My mouth went dry. This was a new level of crazy. "They never even told you about the money," I said slowly. "How are they going to explain where it came from?" Lisa's uncle, a lawyer, had apparently gotten involved, and they were spinning a story about the money being a loan from him. They were claiming I had stolen it. I sat down, trying to make sense of it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized Ethan was desperate. He didn't care how ridiculous it sounded. He would go through with it. I needed proof, so I called Jake. "Tell me everything," I said. "Every detail?" Jake hesitated. "I don't know if I should. My dad's really pissed, and now they're saying I betrayed them." I paused. "They've been lying to you. Jake, you have to trust me. Can you meet me somewhere?" He agreed, reluctantly, and we set up a time to meet at a diner outside town. It was a place where no one would notice us. When I met him there, Jake looked nervous. His eyes kept darting around the parking lot. "You did the right thing, Jake," I told him. "But I need proof." Without saying another word, Jake slid his phone across the table. "I recorded them." I blinked. "You did what?" I knew no one would believe me without proof. I played the recording, and there it was, Lisa's voice, Ethan's voice, my father's voice. They were planning to take my money to a casino, convinced they could turn $70,000 into $500,000 overnight. "That's all I needed," I said, my heart pounding. "You've saved me." But I also knew Jake was now in deep. "You can't let them know you gave this to me." I warned him. "You can't be involved." He nodded. "I just want out." I had an idea. "How would you like to stay with me for a while?" Jake's eyes widened. "You mean it?" "Yeah," I said. "When this blows up, you'll need a place to stay, and I have a feeling things are about to get ugly." Jake agreed. We made plans for him to come over the next night while his parents were out, but before we could even get that far, everything got a whole lot worse. The next morning, my mom called again, but this time, her voice was shaky. "Oscar, something happened. Ethan's in the hospital." My stomach dropped. "What happened?" "He was mugged last night." I didn't buy it. Ethan wasn't the type to get into fights. Where was he? I asked, already knowing the answer. Near the casino. I hung up. Getting dressed quickly, something was off. I didn't trust this story. When I got to the hospital, Ethan was unconscious, his face swollen. Lisa was crying, and my father was standing in the corner, arms crossed, as if he were trying to disappear into the wall. Ethan mumbled something, and I leaned in, but I couldn't make it out. Then Lisa grabbed my arm. "You need to give the money back, Oscar," she said in a low voice. "These people." I pulled my arm away. "What people?" Lisa hesitated. "They're dangerous," she whispered. "Who's they?" "Lisa," I pressed, my voice colder than I intended. She avoided my gaze, and that's when it hit me. Ethan hadn't been mugged. He owed someone money, and they were coming to collect. My father knew. I saw it in his eyes. He knew the whole thing was a lie. "Who did you owe, Ethan?" I asked again. He mumbled something incomprehensible, and Lisa jumped in. "He's in danger. You have to give them the money." I shook my head. "Who is they?" "Lisa." She looked away, but my father shifted uncomfortably. That was enough for me. I turned to Ethan, who couldn't meet my eyes. "You staged this, didn't you?" Ethan didn't answer. Neither did my father. I knew then I wasn't. The truth hit me like a ton of bricks. I hadn't just walked into a situation where my father was trying to steal from me. This wasn't just about Ethan's usual messes. No, this was something darker, something deeper. And I was standing right in the middle of it. I didn't even flinch as Lisa grabbed my arm again, her grip tight with desperation. "Oscar, please," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You don't understand. These people—" She glanced over her shoulder, like she expected someone to be lurking behind the hospital door. "They're dangerous. We're talking about people you don't mess with." I yanked my arm away, standing taller, feeling the pressure in my chest. My dad was standing in the corner, arms crossed, his eyes darting everywhere but at me. He was avoiding the truth, trying to dodge it like he always did, but I could see the guilt on his face, the fear. It wasn't just about Ethan anymore. He was involved. And that's when I understood everything. Ethan had lied about the mugging. He didn't get caught up in something random. This whole mugging was a setup to scare me into returning the $70,000. It was all starting to make sense. I turned to Ethan, who had barely enough strength to lift his swollen head. His lips were cracked and his eyes bloodshot, like he'd been through far more than a simple mugging. He looked pathetic. I leaned in closer, my voice low and controlled. "Who did you owe money to?" "Ethan," I asked, but he didn't answer. Lisa's hand shot out to stop me, but I ignored it. "Tell me, did you set this up?" I pressed, frustration bubbling to the surface. I couldn't believe this was happening. My own brother, trying to manipulate me like this, all because of his addiction and laziness. Ethan's gaze flickered to my dad, who had been quiet throughout the entire exchange, but Dad just shifted uncomfortably, refusing to make eye contact. That told me everything I needed to know. "They're in on it together," I muttered under my breath. Ethan closed his eyes for a second, and I thought I might finally get the truth out of him. But then he just mumbled, "I don't know what you're talking about." Lisa saw my expression and quickly intervened. "Don't listen to him. Oscar, he's just scared. He doesn't know what he's done." I stepped back, my mind racing. I had enough. I was done. I turned on my heel and started to walk toward the door. "You've got to be kidding me," I said, shaking my head. "You've lied, manipulated, and used me for years, Ethan, and now this. No, I'm done." Lisa chased after me, but I didn't slow down. "Don't walk away." "Oscar," she pleaded, "please, we need that money. You have no idea how much this is going to cost us, what this is going to do to us." "Cost you?" I turned around and looked her square in the eyes. "You've cost me everything. You and your husband, you've lied, stolen, and now you're trying to manipulate me into giving you back what was mine to begin with. No more. You're not getting a cent from me." Lisa didn't say anything else. She stood there in silence as I walked out of the room, leaving them behind in their mess. The elevator ride was the longest 2 minutes of my life. I knew things weren't going to get better. Not with my father. Not with Ethan. This whole situation had spiraled far beyond anything I had ever imagined. I thought when I pulled back the money that I would finally be done with them, but I was wrong. They had no intention of letting go. They had no intention of giving up. And now they had escalated things to an unbelievable degree. I walked out of the hospital, feeling a mix of anger and cold resolve settling over me. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't bother checking it. I knew it was my mom, and I didn't want to hear another word from her. She had been part of this mess from the start, letting Ethan do whatever he wanted and giving him excuses. Now that I was standing up for myself, I was the bad guy. I headed straight for my car, my mind already thinking about what I had to do next. I had to call Jake again. He was the only one I could trust in this whole situation. I needed him to stay away from his parents, but I also needed him to stay in the loop. I had no idea what my father and Lisa were going to do next, but I knew they wouldn't stop until they had the money back. I hit the dial button and waited. The phone rang twice before Jake picked up. "Uncle Oscar?" He sounded panicked. "Are you okay? What's going on?" "Listen to me," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need you to stay put. Don't go near them. Don't let your parents get to you." "But I think they're getting suspicious," Jake said, his voice shaking. "I think they know I talked to you. My dad's been acting weird. He's been asking questions about what you know." "Good," I said, the anger in my voice rising. "Let them think they've got control. You need to stay away from them." "Jake, I've got this." Jake hesitated. "Are you sure you're not?" "I'm sure," I interrupted, my voice firm. "Just trust me. Stay where you are. I'll come get you soon." I hung up, not giving him a chance to respond. I needed to focus. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about them trying to drag me into their mess, trying to force me into a corner where I would have no choice but to give in. But I wouldn't. Not this time. The next day, I woke up to another phone call from my mom. Her voice was trembling, and I could tell she was on edge. "Oscar, something's happened. Ethan's in the hospital." I froze. The panic in her voice hit me like a wave. "What happened?" "He was mugged last night," she said, her voice cracking. I didn't believe it. Ethan was a mess. Yes, but he wasn't the type to get into fights. He wasn't the type to be in a position where someone would mug him. "Where was he?" I asked, my voice cold. "Near the casino," she said. I couldn't ignore it anymore. Everything was pointing to the same thing. Ethan had set the whole thing up, and now he was trying to scare me into giving him the money back. I grabbed my keys and headed straight for the hospital. When I got there, Ethan was in a bed, looking like he had been in a fight. His lip was swollen, and his eye was nearly shut, but the look in his eyes, he was faking it. I could see it. Lisa was sitting at his side, her face streaked with fake tears. And my father, he was standing by the window, arms crossed, looking like he was ready to argue with the world. I walked into the room, and everything went silent. They knew what was coming. I wasn't there to play along anymore. Ethan mumbled something about being mugged, but I didn't buy it. "Who did you owe money to?" "Ethan?" I asked again, my voice low. Ethan looked at my father, then back at me, and mumbled, "I don't know, Oscar. Tell me the truth. Did you owe someone money, or did you set this whole thing up?" My father exhaled loudly, looking uncomfortable. He wasn't going to answer, and neither was Ethan. I turned to Lisa. "Did you send the text, the one threatening me if I didn't give the money back?" She froze for a second, eyes darting around. "No," she said too quickly. "I didn't send anything." I didn't believe her. "It was you. You set it all up." Lisa looked at me, her face turning red with anger. "You don't understand, Oscar. We needed that money." I stared at her, the bitterness rising in my throat. "You staged an entire attack to trick me. That's pathetic." Ethan finally looked up, pleading with me. "Oscar, please." I shook my head. "I'm done." Lisa started to cry, but it didn't affect me. I was done with all of them. I turned and walked out of the room. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their chaos. I left the hospital, blocking Lisa's number, my father's, and Ethan's. I didn't care what they had to say anymore. I was done being their punching bag, done being their ATM. It was over. I called Jake, already knowing what I had to do. "You still want to stay with me?" I asked. "Yeah," he replied immediately. "I can't go back there. Uncle Oscar." I drove straight to his place. When I picked him up, he was standing outside with a backpack in hand. "I'm ready," he said. I looked at him, smiling for the first time in days. "We're starting fresh, Jake." And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. Story 3. It started like any other morning. I woke up to the sound of my sister and her husband, Adam, arguing in the kitchen. Not unusual. They had been living with me for 8 months longer than they'd promised, and every morning was the same, complaining about money, jobs, They're so-called plans that never seem to come to fruition. But this morning was different. This morning, my mom called me a loser. I had been making coffee when her voice broke through the phone. "Is it hard for you to give your sister money to buy a house?" she asked, her voice full of that typical casual judgment. I didn't flinch, I smiled instead, thinking she was just joking, maybe being a bit sarcastic, but no, she was serious. And that's when I realized how far things had gone. For months, I had been their bank. My sister and Adam had moved in, promising it would be temporary. They needed a place to figure things out, they said. A few weeks turned into a few months, and eventually, it became my responsibility to feed them, house them, and even buy them a car so they could start over. But instead of taking responsibility, they just ate my food, used my electricity, and played video games at all hours of the night loudly, like it was a hotel. And all the while, I was drowning in their debt. Every time I confronted them, they threw the "we're family" card at me. Family helps each other, they said, their voices dripping with entitlement, but they didn't help. They didn't try to contribute. They didn't try to find jobs. My sister claimed she was waiting for the right opportunity. Adam, on the other hand, acted like working a regular job was beneath him. My frustration grew with every passing day. They weren't trying. They weren't contributing. And the worst part, they didn't appreciate it at all. Then came my mom's visit. She hadn't been around much since they moved in, her and my stepfather Mark, living comfortably in their nice house while I was stuck in this never-ending cycle of helping. But when she heard they needed a place to stay, she immediately shut them down. "We don't have any room," she said, which was a flat-out lie. They had 2 extra bedrooms, plenty of space, and more than enough money, but taking them in would have meant spending that money, and my mom didn't want to do that. So, the burden fell on me. I remember her sitting on my couch that morning, sipping coffee I had made, in an apartment I paid for, and laughing at me. "Is it hard for you to give your sister money to buy a house?" she asked. It was as if I was the selfish one. At first, I laughed, thinking she was kidding, but she wasn't. She actually thought I should dip into my savings to help my sister buy a house. Not a rental, not a down payment, a house. "You're her brother," my mom said. "Why would you want her to struggle?" That was when it hit me. She didn't see the problem. She thought my sole purpose in life was to make my sister's life easier. She didn't care how much I had sacrificed, how exhausted I was, how much they were ruining my life. It was as if I existed solely to fix their messes. I wasn't going to be their financial safety net anymore. So I smiled, told my mom she needed to leave, and that was that. The next morning, at exactly 7:00 a.m., I woke my sister and Adam up. I didn't give them a choice. I walked into their room, flipped on the lights, and said, "Wake up, start packing." They both sat up, disoriented and confused, like I had just interrupted their dream world. "What's going on?" my sister mumbled, her voice heavy with sleep. "You're moving out," I said. "You're going to Mom's." At first, they laughed, thinking I was joking, but when I didn't laugh back, their faces shifted. I saw the defensive walls come up. "We can't just leave. Where are we supposed to go?" My sister shot back. I pointed at the door. "I just told you, Mom's." She turned to Adam, who was still rubbing his eyes, trying to process the situation. "She doesn't want us there." "Not my problem," I replied coldly. "She'll have to deal with it." They begged me, pleaded for more time. Adam tried to act tough, but I shut him down. By noon, they had packed their things into the car I'd bought for them, and we were on our way to my mother's house. When we arrived, my mom wasn't as pleased to see them as she had thought she would be. I pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and sat there, letting the tension hang in the air. My sister and Adam were quiet now, sitting in the back seat, no longer hopeful I would change my mind. "Go ahead," I said, not moving. My sister crossed her arms. "She's not going to let us stay here." I shrugged. "That's between you and Mom." Adam scowled. But what was he going to do? Complain I had done everything for them, fed them, housed them, bought them a car, and this is how they repaid me, by sitting around doing nothing and treating me like I owed them more. I grabbed their bags from the trunk and set them by the front door. I rang the doorbell. When my mom opened the door and saw the suitcases, her face went pale. She looked at me, then at them. "What's this?" she asked, her voice dripping with confusion. "They need a place to stay," I said, my tone light, but my words carrying weight. "Like you said, they're young. They shouldn't be struggling. And family helps each other, right? My sister and Adam stood there, playing their part, pitiful looks on their faces, trying to win her over with their drama. Mom, can we? No. My mom cut her off, her voice sharp. You're not staying here. I smiled, watching my sister's mouth drop open in disbelief. What do you mean no? She asked, stunned. I mean no, my mom repeated. You're not staying here. Kyle's already done enough for you. Adam ran a hand through his hair. Where are we supposed to go? I raised an eyebrow, not my problem. At that moment, my stepfather Mark walked into the doorway behind my mom. He looked at the suitcases, then at my mom, then at me. Why can't they stay? He asked. It was like the world shifted. I could see the panic in my mom's eyes. My stepfather had just thrown a wrench into her plan. They're your kids. He continued. We have the room. Let them stay. My mom turned to him, as if she had been betrayed. Mark, you don't understand. I do, he interrupted. Kyle has been taking care of them for 8 months. It's our turn. I'd never seen my mom so angry. She glared at me, then at my sister and Adam, before finally turning back to Mark. They don't have jobs. They're lazy. They just sit around and do nothing. Sounds familiar? Doesn't it? I said, my smile widening as I saw my mom's anger start to boil over. Mark turned to my sister and Adam. You can stay, but on one condition: you both have to get jobs. Immediately. Adam looked uncomfortable. My sister hesitated. But what choice did they have? My mom wasn't going to fight Mark on this. Not without making a scene. I leaned against my car, watching. Good luck with that, I muttered. My mom turned to me, rage building in her eyes. You can't just dump them like this. Kyle! Actually, I said, I can. They're your responsibility now. I added, with a cold finality. Then Mark did something that shocked everyone. He turned to my mom and said, if you don't want them here, you leave. Simple as that. I couldn't help but laugh. Mark looked at me, then back at my mom. You've spent months telling Kyle he has to help them, but now that it's on you, you can't handle it. My mom's face went red. That's not fair. It's exactly what's happening, Mark shot back. For the first time in my life, I felt like Mark was actually standing up to her. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. My mom, for the first time ever, backed down. Fine, she muttered, folding her arms. Sitting down on the couch, I turned to my sister and Adam. Get jobs, no excuses, otherwise you're out. Mark slapped me on the back as we walked out. Go home, Kyle. You're done with this mess. And just like that, it was over. I got in my car, feeling lighter than I had in months. But that's when I got the first of many phone calls. The weight of the past few days finally started to settle in as I drove away from my mom's house. It wasn't just the relief that had me feeling lighter, it was the strange sense of freedom. I had been taking care of my sister and Adam for months, and now, after everything, I had finally set a boundary. I had finally stopped being their unpaid caretaker. But of course, peace was never meant to last. When I pulled into my parking space back at my apartment, I sat there for a minute, just staring at the steering wheel. For the first time in months, the place was quiet. No yelling, no video game blaring through the walls at 3 a.m., no arguments about food or rent. It was just me and the silence I had forgotten to appreciate. I grabbed my things, went inside, and flopped down on the couch. I hadn't realized how badly I needed this solitude. Just as I started to unwind, my phone buzzed. I ignored it at first, but then it buzzed again, and again. Groaning, I picked it up and saw my sister's name on the screen. I rolled my eyes, ready for another round of her complaints, but I picked up anyway. Yeah, I answered, trying to keep my voice as neutral as possible. Her voice was shaky, almost panicked. Kyle, you have to help us. Mom kicked us out. I blinked in disbelief. What? They're gone. Kyle, my sister continued. She kicked us out as soon as you left. You turned around and she paused, collecting herself. And Mark left too. She's gone crazy. We have nowhere to go. I felt a strange mix of satisfaction and frustration. After everything that had happened, I thought I'd finally be free. But now this? I couldn't believe it. You're telling me that Mark left, I repeated, trying to process the absurdity. He was the one who stood up for you guys. Yeah, she said, her voice tight. Now it's just us, sitting outside. Mom didn't even let us pack our things properly. My heart was racing as I stood up, pacing around the apartment. My first instinct was to call my mom, But I knew it wouldn't help. Not now. Not after everything that had gone down. She was still her, always blaming someone else for everything. "All right," I said, exhaling through my teeth. "I'm coming over. Stay where you are." When I arrived at my mom's house, I could hear the shouting from the driveway. The door was wide open, and my sister and Adam were standing outside, arms crossed, staring at the house. They didn't even acknowledge me as I stepped out of the car. I wanted to tell them how ridiculous it all was, how they had gotten what they deserved. But I kept quiet. This was my mother's mess now, not mine. I walked up to them. "How long has this been going on?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. My sister didn't take her eyes off the house. "Since you left," she muttered, still looking like she was waiting for something to change. "They've been fighting for hours." I didn't need to ask what was going on inside. I could hear my mom's voice, sharp and angry, and Mark's deeper, more reasoned tone trying to keep her calm, but this time it wasn't working. "Let's go inside and see how this plays out," I said, motioning for my sister and Adam to follow me. We walked into the house, and the first thing I saw was my mom pacing in the kitchen, her face flushed red with rage. Mark was leaning against the counter, rubbing his temples like he'd had enough of the drama. I stood there in the doorway for a second, watching the scene unfold. "They eat everything. They don't clean. They don't do anything," my mom yelled, her hands flying up in frustration. "I can't stand them anymore." I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. It felt good to laugh like I was watching the universe finally hand her some well-deserved karma. She turned on me immediately. "You think this is funny?" she snapped, eyes blazing. "Yeah," I said, grinning. "I do." "Sound familiar, doesn't it?" Her jaw tightened, and she shot a glare at me, but before she could respond, Mark stepped in. "Enough, Janet," he said, his voice firm. "You've been doing this for months. Either you accept that they're staying, or you leave. You pick." I watched as my mom froze, eyes darting between Mark and me. The room went silent for a moment. It was like watching a showdown in a Western, except the stakes weren't life or death, they were ego and pride. "You're serious," my mom whispered, like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "Yes," Mark said, his voice quieter but unwavering. "I'm serious. You let Kyle take care of her for 8 months. Mark continued, addressing my mom. "Now it's your turn. They need help, and I'm not going to let you push them out like this." It was a power move, and I could see my mom's control slipping away. I had never seen her like this, speechless, cornered. For once, someone was standing up to her, and it wasn't me. But it wasn't just Mark's words that got to her, it was his tone. It was final. "I've had enough of your whining. Either accept them here or leave." I leaned against the doorframe, watching the interaction play out. I could feel the air shifting around us. My mother, for the first time, didn't have the power, and Mark, my stepfather, the man who had always been the silent, passive partner, was finally taking charge. There was a long silence before my mom exhaled sharply. "Fine," she muttered, throwing her arms up in defeat. "You want them here? You deal with them." Mark nodded once, as if that was all he needed. Then he turned to my sister and Adam. "You get jobs, no excuses, immediately." Adam's face contorted, clearly not used to being given direct orders, but Mark didn't blink. My sister hesitated, but she had no choice. This wasn't up for negotiation. The fight was over. I smiled to myself, feeling something I hadn't in a long time, a sense of control. For once, the balance of power had shifted in my favor. I hadn't needed to beg. I hadn't needed to argue. My mother had just been put in her place, and it felt good. "Good luck with that," I muttered. Getting back in my car, I couldn't help but grin as I drove off, the sound of my mom's furious yelling fading behind me. But that wasn't the end. As I was heading home, my phone buzzed again. It was my sister, her voice shaky and desperate. "Kyle, you've got to help us. Mom kicked us out. We have nowhere to go." I blinked, pulling over to the side of the road. I had just been through this. What was going on now? "Wait, what?" I asked, confused. "Mom kicked us out as soon as you left," she repeated, voice cracking. Mark tried to stop her, but it didn't work. We're sitting outside, and she's inside screaming at him. I couldn't process it fast enough. I knew my mom was irrational, but this was something else entirely. I wasn't sure how to respond. My sister and Adam had nowhere to go now, and my mom was in full meltdown mode. I could tell this wasn't going to end well, but there was nothing I could do. I couldn't go back and undo everything that had happened. And I didn't want to. I stared at my phone, listening to my sister cry on the other end. I had to do something, but I had already done enough.